I'm never broken. Do we believe that? I mean, really, let's be real, right? We don't come together in spiritual community to pretend. We come together in spiritual community to really find a way through those spaces and those places that are so hard. And in that process, we get to reveal more of who we are. That's the idea, right? Doesn't always happen that way, but we get to reveal more of who we are. That's the opportunity that is presented to us. And I have just been sitting a lot with transition. What is transition? What is it really, right? The personal transitions that we're all in right now, shifts, changes, the transition that the world has been in as we are navigating this pandemic, now endemic. Is it an endemic or is it a pandemic? I don't know. And in all of this, we also have Reverend Tim, who navigated us through that really uncertain time. Now he is leaving and moving on to Hawaii, so there's another transition. And then here I am, and some of you are like, who are you? I don't know you. I don't know who you are. And when we come together in spiritual community, part of what we are saying yes to, part of that agreement, is that we are here to reveal who we truly have come here to be. And there are a number of things that can get in the way of that process, right? And what I'm really committed to is that oftentimes when we think spiritual community, we think that we need to look like this. We need to look happy and cheerful, and it's just so amazing. Isn't life wonderful? Om Shanti Namaste. And then all it takes is one thing, one moment, one comment, one event, and we end up looking more like this. And all that spiritual stuff that we're so committed to, it's just in a heartbeat. It is gone, all right? I'm sure you've experienced that. The place where most of us have experienced that is when we're driving in the car and somebody cuts us off. All right, somebody does something insane. My wife and I had an interesting drive-in this morning, right? And I kept saying, Chris is like, it's Sunday morning. I'm like, well, it apparently is still their Saturday night. Because that's how they're driving, right? It's still their Saturday night. So when we flip like that, right? When all of a sudden we get into that place that is intense reactivity, where we are is that we have found ourselves in enemy territory. We have found ourselves in the place where we think that something or someone is actually personally against us. How many people in here have yelled at their phone or their computer because it's not doing what it's supposed to do? Okay, right? The phone can't hear you. The phone is not personally trying to make your life horrible, and yet we act as if the phone is purposefully doing something to us. So when we're in enemy territory, what comes up for us is uncomfortable feelings, right? We're like agitation, anger, frustration, those uncomfortable feelings. We might have some unpleasant sensations. So for those somatic people with me out there, right, we might have these things that happen in our body. We might even get sick, right? If we're in the midst of a really intense reactivity experience, I get this thing in my stomach where I just know that like something's not in alignment, and I know it's me. I want to make it that they're not in alignment, but no, it's me, and I can feel it in my stomach. I have this experience of this unpleasant sensation. And then for me, the worst ones are the troublesome thoughts, right? The thoughts that go round and round and round and round and round and round and round. And anybody in here stay up late at night having arguments with the person that you're in the midst of something with? And the thoughts like, if I could just make them understand, and you're running through your arguments, and if they can only understand that, right? And some of those troublesome thoughts are also about what's wrong with me. What's wrong with me? Why do I always do that? Why am I incapable? Why can't I? So those troublesome thoughts work both ways. And we develop really fabulous coping mechanisms when we're trying to navigate those unpleasant sensations and those thoughts. And we create coping mechanisms because, who in here really wants to be uncomfortable? So the minute we start to feel uncomfortable, we want to fix it. We want to make it better. And the way that we tend to make it better is that the first one that most of us go to is we blame, right? We blame, like they did that. If only they had done it differently, then I wouldn't be experiencing what I'm experiencing. We might get angry in that process, and in that process of our anger, we might really have all that judgment come in, right? So not only is they should have done it differently, but they're an idiot because they didn't do it differently. Right? All the ways that we judge people, we decide what it is that they think they have done, who they are, and we believe that in those moments of reactivity. Sometimes it becomes resistance. So, somebody is really sort of irking you, and you're like, yeah, you think I'm going to help you out? I'm not going to help you out. You think I'm going to do that for you? I don't think I'm going to do that for you, right? We resist. We're like, no, that you go do that. And then that goes along with withdrawal, right? So we go, oh no, that's you. Good luck. Have fun with that as we walk off into the sunset. Or sometimes with withdrawal, we don't even come into the conversation because we're trying to keep ourselves safe. And so we don't even enter in. We don't even attempt to bridge the connection. So we're withdrawing ourselves. And then the one that is my personal favorite is efforting. If I just do it one more time. I was sharing in the class yesterday a story of my interaction once with the San Francisco City Hall records computer system and how it was impossible for me to navigate. It was literally impossible for me to navigate. And I spent an hour trying to navigate it. And the entire time I was trying to navigate it, I was literally talking to the machine. What's wrong with you? Why won't you work? Sighing. All these things I was doing instead of just going to ask for help. Right? Which it took an hour of intense reactivity for me to finally go and actually get some help. And all of that we justify. Oh no, I am justified in being angry and annoyed, and that person, no, this anger is righteous. Righteous anger. They should know better. So one of the things that we're looking at in the quantum living class is the difference between reactivity and responsiveness. So not everything in this world is going to happen in a way that we just sort of roll over and play dead on. People sometimes behave badly. And when they behave badly, we get to meet them with that and call them on it and say, hey, that was really rude. Or hey, that actually was an incredibly racist statement that you just said. We get to call people on that. That was misogyny right there. That was not nice. You're not being very compassionate to where this person is right now in their experience. We get to say that to people. But there's a difference between responding to someone from a place of clarity and centeredness and reacting. Reacting means that you got hooked in, that there's something in you that somehow is connected into whatever it is that triggered you. The trigger means that it's yours, and it's not actually about them. And that's really hard to flip around. And the reason why our reactivity, it's an incredible coping mechanism. The reason why we get so reactive is because what's really underneath all of the anger and the rah and the withdrawal and all of that is the deepest sadness and melancholy. This is what we're afraid that we're actually going to walk around looking like. Because the things that we say to ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves that are not true about ourselves, are so awful. Really. One of my shadow beliefs is I don't matter. Really think about that for a minute, that that's somehow walking around inside of me. How painful is that? Other shadow beliefs are I'm not capable. I'm invisible. I'm unlovable. I'm unworthy. All of these stories, these myths, these beliefs that we have created about ourselves based on our interactions in the world, based on something that one random third grade teacher said to you. Mrs. Dollinger, she comes up a lot in my worksheets, said to me, and then all of a sudden I believe it about myself. And I take it in and I absorb it and I actually am living from that place. So of course I don't want to acknowledge that. Well, who wants to acknowledge that I actually think I don't matter? Like, ugh, I don't want to acknowledge that. So I push it away. I push it outside of myself. Because the truth is that for most of us, unless you're an incredibly enlightened being, and they are here, is that when the way that we actually think we are is that we are broken. That when we look in the mirror of ourself, what we see is a brokenness. What we see is something that we have to fix, that we have to make better, and especially that we have to hide the brokenness from everybody else because we don't want anybody to see it, right? We don't want anybody to know how broken we actually are. So we call this the shadow, and I love this image of this little girl. Because this is what happens to ourselves. We are who we are, and yet out there in the world, we think we're some monster. We think that there's something really scary about us, that we think that there's something really wrong with us, inherently, something. And that is not what we believe in unity. In unity, we believe that we are made in the image and likeness, that we are wholeness itself, that available to each one of us is that perfection that is imperfectly perfect in our human expression. That is what we know and we believe, or at least it's what we say we believe. But when the rubber meets the road, when we actually are caught up in the story in our life, those myths, those beliefs about who we are become so active. And the pain and the uncomfortability of them means that we throw them out there in the world instead. So the way, shadow by its very nature, you can't see, really, because shadow will always sort of move behind you, right? It's slippery, it's tricky. So the way that you can see your shadow, what's alive for you, what are those myths and those messages, is through your dreams. Your dreams can reveal that to you. And the number one way is through projection. By looking at how, because you're so uncomfortable with those things about yourself, that you project them out into the world instead. So you know how there's always that one person or that one type of person that just irritates you? That just bugs you. They have a certain sort of energy around them. And notice how they always come into your life. They're always around somewhere, hovering on the sidelines so that they can drive you nuts. At least that's what it feels like, right? But that's just the part of yourself that you don't want to admit that you are projecting outward. And so you're seeing it everywhere. You're looking for it everywhere. So the idea behind this quantum living process, the idea behind unity principles, regardless of whether you're taking the class or not, becoming awake and aware of our projection, becoming aware of how our reactivity is a clue for us around what it is that is trying to be healed within ourselves. What is it that wants to be made whole? What is it that at the root of our root, we know we are not broken, as Marcus so beautifully sang. So how do we allow that truth to radiate forth? So we can look at our projections, and then the technical term is we get to recall them. We get to call that projection back. So whatever it is that's irritating you out there in the world, where it is creating a reaction within you, it is an opportunity to say to yourself, how am I that? How am I so afraid of that I am turning myself inside out to not be that? Right? To not be whatever it is that I think would be so horrible to be. So for people who struggle with the extrovert, you're in trouble. with me, but who struggle with extroverts and energy and all of that, right? The invitation is to sit back and be like, so how am I afraid of my own energy, of my own zeal, of my own enthusiasm? The reverse is true for those of us who struggle with introverts. How are we afraid of being still? How are we trying so hard to not be quiet and to actually listen and align ourselves? What is it that we're afraid to hear? So just notice where that projection is, what's happening, and just spend some time sitting with that. Because ultimately, the truth of who you are is divine. You are not that broken image in the mirror. You are this. You are wholeness. You are life itself. You are all that there is and more. Carl Jung says, the shadow is the block that separates us most effectively from the divine voice. The shadow, our fear that we're going to be something horrible, actually blocks us from understanding our wholeness. It keeps us locked in to an idea that we have about ourselves and about the world, because whatever we understand about ourselves, we project it out into the world. So if you're experiencing a lot of lack and limitation in the world, take a look and be like, where am I uncomfortable with lack? Like, what is that? Right? It's all about inquiry. It's all about process. So the biggest piece that's really been alive for me, I had dinner. Chris and I bid last year at the holiday auction on Pamela's Persian dinner for 8, and we won, and it was awesome. I don't want to tell people because there'll be competition next year. It was awesome. We had a wonderful time, and Bev, thank you, she was assisting Pamela, and they made these beautiful name cards, and they tucked one of those angel cards into everybody's name card. And the card that I pulled was surrender. I'm stepping in as senior minister at Unity in Marin, and what is the card that I pull? Surrender. It was so perfect, right? So perfect. And as I sat with that word for the past week, what I really, oftentimes when we think about surrender, we think we're giving up, right? We think of it somehow that we have given up. And so I'm going to invite us to redefine the word surrender. I'm going to invite us to understand that what we're surrendering is our small understanding of who we are. What we're surrendering is the limited awareness of the truth of our potential. What we're surrendering is the story that we've made up. What we're surrendering is the stuff that isn't actually really true. And it can feel like we're giving up sometimes because our ego gets so attached to how we think it's supposed to be that it can be challenging to surrender into the wholeness that we are, right? The truth of who we are. So one of the things that we really focus on in quantum living is this idea that all perception is misperception. Take a breath with me. Right? That all perception is misperception. That you cannot take yourself out of the picture. You can't remove yourself from what's happening. You can't perceive something without the stories, without your background, without the experiences that you've had. And the scientists have done studies, which I think is really cool, is that in any moment, there are 200 billion bits of data available to you. In any moment, for your brain to process and take in. Do you know how many we actually take in? 200,000. 200 billion is what's available. And we take in 200,000 every second. There is so much that we are not paying attention to. There is so much that we are ignoring, that our brain, our system is deciding irrelevant, 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 not important, not important, not important. It's all about this. And how do we focus? How do we know how to focus on what's important? Is we focus on the things that are going to support the belief system that we have. We're looking for the proof that the things that we believe are true. So our brain, our system says, ooh, we got a task. And they just focus on, let's just look for what they think is important. And everything else fades into the background. All perception is misperception because we're missing a piece. We're missing more than a piece. We're missing like a giant amount of what's actually possible in that moment. So it's incomplete. It's also personal, and it is shaped by our beliefs. So when we stand there and say, no, this is a fact, I find it interesting, especially nowadays, that we really need to be taught the difference between fact and opinion. That we don't actually really know the difference between fact and opinion. We think that our opinion about something is a fact. And I was sharing with the quantum living class, the trial that's going on right now for Alex. I don't even want to give his last name any airplay around the Sandy Hook, the defamation case that's going on. And I watched a piece of the judge on this case. And she was saying to him, so he committed perjury twice in one day on the stand. Saying that he had disclosed all of his texts when it was proven that he didn't, and saying that he was bankrupt when it was proven that he wasn't. And he kept trying to tell the jury that he was bankrupt and that he had disclosed everything. And the judge finally had to say, okay, you need to stop. It is not true. You have committed perjury twice. You need to stop telling the jury something that is not true. And he said, well, but I believed it was true. And she said, that's why we're here in this courtroom today. She said, just because you believe something is true, it is not true. Just because you think something is true does not actually make it true. Now that lesson is applicable to each of us. How attached do we get to what it is that we think we know? The book study, Think Again, is going to be all about blowing that up, right? But how attached do we get to all of that? So this is I've shown this cartoon before, but it's so perfect, right? We see things not as they are, but as we are. We cannot get ourselves out of the frame. And once we actually admit that and acknowledge it and say yes to that and incorporate that into how we move through the world, it makes life a whole lot easier. So what are we being invited to surrender? We're being invited to surrender our story. Oh, we love our stories, right? This is how I got to where I am. This was my story of survival. This is my story of surmounting odds. This is my story of name it, right? Can you actually surrender up that story? Because that story is a very, very small part of what was actually happening. There was more available in that moment that maybe you didn't see or you didn't notice. Can you surrender up your attachment to what it's going to look like? So this, I believe, is the number one reason for our suffering. It's a very Buddhist idea, I know, but unity and Buddhism very much align. But this idea that our attachment creates our suffering. We expect things to go a certain way, we want them to go a certain way, and it's a fine line because we believe in naming and claiming what we want and expect in our life. And then we also have to let it go on some level. We have to trust and lean into the faith that everything is truly working for our greatest good, even when it doesn't feel like it. And then we have to also be willing to give up control, because that's where a lot of our reactivity comes from, is that there are needs that we have that aren't being met, and because they're not being met, we're trying to control everything so that we can get them met. And the invitation is, what if you actually meet those needs yourself? What if you stop trying to torque the world out there, but you actually shift yourself in here? I call it becoming your own answered prayer. What if you actually can meet those unmet needs? What if that is what you are being invited to become? And then the last piece that we all need to navigate is fear. Anytime we enter into a time of change and transition, we don't feel safe. And because we don't feel safe, all of our strategies and coping mechanisms kind of come online. And it's all because we're afraid. We're afraid that it's not going to look the way we want it to look. We're afraid that somehow we're going to be hurt. We're going to be made vulnerable. So the flip side of fear in unity is faith, right? Is faith, being able to walk in faith. And fear can be translated into false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. All perception is misperception. So when the fear starts to get triggered, false evidence appearing real, and it can feel very real, but there is always something more that is available to us. So the last thing I want to leave you with is that this is all happening within each of us individually. Who have I come here to be? But I also want to invite Unity and Marin as a community to sit with this idea of who have we come here to be. Because as a collective, we also have our strategies and our coping mechanisms. As a collective, we have our shadow. We have the things that we don't want to see that we are, and the things that we are hoping that we can be, but we don't necessarily believe that we are those things. That is alive in the collective consciousness that is Unity and Marin. So as we are stepping forward individually, the invitation is to also pay attention to what's happening in that larger energetic field. Because that's how we as a community are going to heal and we're going to grow. By being willing to pay attention to the places that we're trying to protect, to the spaces that may feel wounded. We need to actually become present to all of that together so that we can begin to move forward from a place of wholeness. There is no lack in this community. Do you actually believe that? There is more than enough in this community. Do you actually believe that? That we are a community of love and where is the hook for you? Where does the fear kick in? And that disrupts the wholeness that we are collectively. So let's take a breath. Because it's all about compassion, right? In all of this, if we're talking about those wounds, we're talking about those spots, we're being invited to have compassion for ourselves, for our wounding, and as we stand in that for ourselves, guess what? We get to stand in that for each other. We get to be more compassionate, more understanding, like, oh, it's still their Saturday night, instead of what an idiot, right? Can we have compassion? Can we open up what's possible instead of looking for what's wrong in the situation, right? Can we actually shift our focus and look for the blessing, look for the opportunity, look for the good that is always available to us? So our affirmations today. I am willing to be vulnerable. I am willing to embrace my shadow.
I am willing to embrace my shadow.
I am willing to surrender up the small me.
I am willing to surrender up the small me.
And I say yes to my divine identity.
And I say yes to my divine identity.
And so it is.
So it is.
Amen.